All right, guys. So it finally happened, and I knew this was coming. We're in the process of tuning the car. I was coming up to a light, and I went to hit the gas to downshift, and nothing. Right. So the car there was no throttle response whatsoever. I looked at my gauge, everything's checking out fine, but the car just died. So I ended up coasting to a light, and I couldn't restart the car. And one thing I noticed, I can't hear the fuel pump priming. So I'm assuming that's going to be the issue. So fortunately, that is why I got the truck, to help in these sort of situations. And I'm also noticing that my battery is dying really quickly. I could only try to restart the car a couple times before I could hear it, start to drain. So I'm gonna have to look at that as well. So obviously I have a problem, but I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing towed back to the house and see if I can diagnose the problem. Now, hopefully it's just a fuse or something. And nothing majorly wrong with the wiring. I guess best case, it's a fuse. Next best, the fuel pump maybe got clogged, even though I cleaned everything out, or I thought I did. But anyway, so we're gonna get this thing towed back to the house, and I will catch you guys later. All right, so what's going on, guys? So as I mentioned in the intro, I did have my first breakdown in the Galant. I'm actually not that bummed about it. It doesn't seem to be too major. Like I said, what happened was, as I was coming to a light, I went to kind of rev match as I was downshifting, and I noticed I didn't get any response. Like I hit the gas, nothing happened. So of course I ended up pulling over. And when I tried to restart the car, I noticed that I didn't hear the fuel pump. So if you're not familiar, these cars do not prime like when you just turn the key on. They don't prime until you actually go to start the car. But even with the Walbro, you can hear it when you start the car. It's a pretty audible whine. Again, it's not loud during operation or anything like that, but when you go to start it, you can hear it cut on and hear it whine. And you didn't hear that noise. Of course, the car is still trying to turn over, but again, it's just missing that noise. So I'm assuming there's something going wrong with the fuel pump. I'm thinking it's not going to be the fuel pump itself. Hopefully, it's just a fuse or a relay. So one thing I did notice is I didn't hear the relay click either. So I'm hoping that's the issue, because that's a quick swap. Of course, it is raining now, so I'm kind of bummed about that, and I wasn't able to get the car in the garage because I have a pretty steep incline going into my garage, and it was late at night. I was already tired, so now the car's kind of stuck out there, and it is raining. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop the hood, see if I can swap that relay out, because fortunately, because junkyard, I have extras, and yeah, hopefully it gets the car running. If not, I do have some other projects I can work on. I did manage to paint my windshield cowl. Now I really didn't want it to be shiny, but the clear, I didn't have any like low gloss clear. It looks 100 times better than it did, because of course it was all faded, and I did paint the windshield wiper arms as well. Those are just in that truck bed liner, because I'm really working on, again, the exterior, getting the car ready, and again, small stuff like that to me that really stands out. But just looking at the car, I'm loving the way it looks. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and get the hood popped, and see if we can find what the problem is, and hopefully it's something small. So like I said, I've got it hooked up, and this will work either way. If you want to find out if you have a ground, then you can hook it to a power source and then touch this, and if it lights up, then you have a ground. Like I said, it's really just completing a circuit. But if you look at it, I touch a little post on the fuse, because you see the light lights up, so I know that fuse is good. So now you can do this just with each one. It's a real quick way to see which fuse is working without having to pull each one. All right, guys, so I did check all my fuses. They all check out. So my next step is to move to the relays. For that, I'm just going to look at the fuse box cover, see which one controls like the fuel pump and the fuel starting, and the MFI, I think is what it's called. And I'm just going to pull that and replace it, see if that does anything. If not, and do a little further diagnostics. All right, guys, so I know I skipped over a lot of this, but I did check my fuses. They were good to go on the fuse box on the inside and over here. So my relays, I went ahead and swapped those out. Then I moved over. I went ahead and checked my cam position sensor. I swapped that out. The benefits of having a parts car, I have a lot of extra stuff that I know already worked because that car ran. So I swapped this out. It was doing the same thing. All right, guys, so I think I may have found my issue, or at least part of it. Of course, like I said, I checked all the fuses. I do that first just because they're easy to get to, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. But after that, there's a few other things to check. You always hear that a combustion engine needs three things. You need compression, spark, and fuel for it to run. So compression is kind of easy. Basically, if you turn the engine over and it sounds like there's no resistance, like it's just spinning wildly, then you probably don't have any compression. So right now, that's not the case. So I'm not even going to check that right now. My second one's actually going to be spark, because that's kind of like the second easiest thing to test. Like, so testing spark is pretty simple. You can get a tester at the auto parts store for a couple bucks, or you can do it the freeway. Like, so what I've done is actually taken the spark plug out of the number 1 cylinder, and you just put it up against something metal. So in this case, I'm using the manifold, and what you're going to do is just crank the engine over. And you don't want to do this a whole lot, but just, once or twice to see what happens. And you should see a spark jump, from the plug to whatever metal object that you have it. So what you guys probably noticed or did notice was there's no spark jumping across that. Like, so for whatever reason, I do not have spark. I wanted to go ahead and check to see if I had fuel. Like, what I did for that, I just took the hose off to the return line and fuel did come out. Now, depending on how long your car has been sitting, that could be residual fuel. So what you can do, and this is not necessarily a safe option to do, is go ahead and turn the car over. The same way you did to test the spark plugs, just turn it over once. And of course, if you're getting fuel, you'll have fuel come out of there. I already did that, and you see I just had a little bit that did shoot out onto that line there. So, all right, guys, so I think I may have diagnosed my problem. So, of course, I already told you that I don't have spark. I have fuel at the rail. What I didn't show you is how to test to see whether your injectors are firing or not, because those are actually two separate things. Because just because I pulled the line off doesn't mean that fuel is actually getting inside of the engine, inside the combustion chamber. Because what I noticed is that when I pulled my spark plugs, they were dry. So even after trying to start it a couple times, it should be still spraying fuel on the plugs. So when you pull those out, they should be wet. So that tells me that even though I have fuel at the rail, which means my pump works, my injectors aren't firing. So when my injectors aren't firing and I have no spark, that kind of led me to this thing right here. This is the crank position sensor. So if you know, this sensor kind of runs down and actually sticks on the end of the crank. There's a little plate attached to the crank anyway, and then as it spins, it reads that signal. Here, this is the plug again. You see it's a triangle plug. It basically has a signal, ground, and a power wire. So it's pretty simple to test this thing out. I'm just gonna plug it back up because I do have a spare. So we're gonna go ahead and plug this back up and go inside the car and turn the ignition to the on position. So the first step is in that pin that's at the bottom. It actually goes 1, 2, 3. I believe, but the pin that's at the bottom of the triangle. And this pin here, we're just gonna stick our probe down in there so that it makes contact. Again, you don't want to push too hard, but get it past the seal so that it's sitting in there. And then we're just gonna touch a grounding point. In this case, I'm gonna use my valve cover bolt. And what you're gonna notice is you got 12, 13 volts. Okay, which tells me this thing is getting power with the key in the ignition. So we're gonna do the same thing with the other one. All right, so like I said, so now I've got my probe in the number 2 pin, which is on the right side of the triangle. The ground and the battery is touching, and I have voltage here. So it has battery and ground. So the next step is to test to see if it's actually getting a signal from the sensor itself. All right, guys, so I got it hooked up to test the sensor itself, whether it's not getting a signal. So what I've done, I went ahead and back pin this onto that right pin. I have the other side hooked to the ground of the battery, and it is reading 5 volts. So now what I'm going to do is actually insert a 1/2-inch drive, ratchet extension, or I think it may be like a 19, 21 millimeter socket, whatever it is. I'll put it up on the screen in case your crank bolt is actually damaged. But as long as it's in good shape, you can go ahead and just use a 1/2-inch drive and go ahead and put it in the crank. Like, so if you're not familiar, this is your crank pulley. The 1/2-inch drive is actually going to fit right in there. Right, and then we're just going to turn this, and as we manually turn the engine over, we should see the volts vary from 5 to nothing back to 5. Now keep in mind, if you take one of your spark plugs out, it will make this easier because you're actually going to be fighting the compression of the engine when you're doing this. So you may want to put an extension on your ratchet, or just get ready for an arm workout. But let's see if I can set this up so that you guys can see it while I try to turn this, because I'm going to need both hands. So guys, it actually doesn't matter which direction you turn it, as long as it's spinning. It's just reading, the magnet is reading the gap that is in that trigger wheel. So I'm turning the engine over, and as you notice, there is no different, there's no change in the signal. So what that tells me is that the crank sensor is probably bad and it's gonna need to be replaced. So I do have one here. This is an OEM part. This is a used OEM part, so I don't know what condition it's in. But I'm gonna have to go ahead and get that replaced. Now to replace this sensor is actually a pain in the butt. Like most things, it seems, because the sensor actually runs, of course it's here, but actually runs behind your power steering bracket, and it clips onto like where the timing cover is on the back side. So we're gonna have to remove the power steering, at least be able to pull it away to be able to pop it out. And then we're gonna have to remove some of these 10mm bolts that are on this plastic cover here, because your timing, because it actually sits right back here. All right, guys, so I got the crank sensor out. Again, I didn't film it, just kind of wanted to get it done. It's really not that hard, but you do have to remove the power steering pump. There are 2 bolts on the right side, 2 on the left. Of course, you also have to take off the belt in order to be able to pull this free. So right now it's just sitting in here because you don't need to take it out. Just get it away from the block, because the cord to this sensor actually runs behind the bracket and kind of along. You can kind of snake it behind the timing belt so you don't have to do anything with that, and then kind of bolt it in place. Now I was worried that once I got to the sensor that it wouldn't be the problem. The last thing I want to do, or that you really want to do when you're trying to diagnose something, is just start replacing parts that don't need to be fixed. So I actually started off on the bottom side. It's easier, like I showed you guys, just to take the crank off, and you can kind of inspect the sensor to see what's going on. So as soon as I took that lower cover off, though, it was immediately apparent what was going on. Now, I've never seen this myself. If you guys can check it out. I've never seen this. So if you don't know, this is what your crank sensor is supposed to look like. Okay, like I said, you have your plug that's up top here. It kind of snakes along the back of the wire, and then this is the part that actually goes around the trigger wheel. So it has a little metal piece. Again, this is all it is. It's really simple. So I was thinking that maybe I had over tightened one of the bolts that go through here, because this piece is just plastic. So you know, I guess that could happen if you were to crack the plastic and this thing doesn't line up right. It won't read the crank sensor, the trigger plate, the trigger wheel, whatever you want to call it. As soon as I took the lower timing cover off, I see bits of plastic that are falling off. And this is my sensor. So if you notice, the whole nose of that sensor there with that little metal piece is gone, is missing. Now I'm not really sure what will cause that. I mean, I didn't experience any excessive vibrations. I didn't feel anything abnormal inside the cabin. The car ran fine. So I don't know what will cause that, outside of the fact that this may not be an OEM sensor and it just failed on me. This was the sensor that I pulled off of the Eclipse. So again, I don't know how many miles were on it, how long it had been there, where it came from. You know, I don't know what it is. So that's the only thing I've really gathered from this, is that maybe it was a knockoff sensor and it just failed. You know, which wouldn't be all that unexpected, because I've already had some bad experience with this car with just cheap sensors giving me problems. So hopefully that's all the issue was. If you guys have had that problem and you know what causes that, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know what happened in your case and what you did to fix the root cause. Because like I said, I don't want to be replacing these sensors, you know, every couple hundred miles. But with that aside, I'm going to go ahead and get this thing buttoned back up, and we're going to see if it starts. So actually, guys, as I said that, I noticed something else. That this is the new one here. You notice it has a Mitsubishi logo on it right here with a part number, whereas this one just has this little white sticker. So like I said, hopefully that was the case with this just being a knockoff that failed, and I don't have any other major issues. All right, so I got everything installed. I got my belts tightened back up, and I'm just gonna set you guys up, give it a test. Good to go. So the car is up and running. Of course, that crank position sensor is pretty easy to diagnose and a lot harder to actually replace. But fortunately, that's all it is, and I will update you guys on if I have that problem again. I'm hoping not. Like I said, I think it was just a cheap sensor, but we will see. And like I said, I'll keep you guys updated. So again, anytime you're trying to diagnose a problem like this, you don't want to go out and immediately start spending money on buying parts, because that'll get really expensive. You just get frustrated and you end up probably scrapping the car. And I've always been a big advocate of knowing a little bit about your car. It's because you can avoid those situations, because there are a lot of shady mechanics out there that would gladly take advantage of their customers who don't know what's going on, or perhaps maybe they just don't know either. So in situations like this, I've heard of people talking about their mechanics, you know, having them replace everything from the spark plugs to the fuel pump, stuff like that, just spending a bunch of money to still have the car not run, and then of course the car ends up in the junkyard. But anyway, guys, if you made this far and you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, and have a great day.